I'm going to start off with a lady called Eleanor Chambers, who nearly has the bottle of champagne in the bag already because she managed to get 5 questions into the question. So hands up, Eleanor. You want here? Whilst the mic's going to you, I think actually you bring up a really good point. It's question number 4 of your sub-questions, but we haven't talked about it yet. Are there any bad case studies that anybody wants to own up to that we can all learn from, whilst Eleanor remembers the rest of her question? Anybody willing to have a bad content?
I'm willing to talk about stuff without mentioning who, the big bad brand name or the big bad agency name, and sort of when stuff goes wrong. And I think one of it is that point of what gets measured gets made, but it is what the key success is. So I've been involved in things which were absolutely fucking brilliant at getting people, once they'd made the decision to be in the funnel, to buy stuff. But it was funded out of a campaign which was to get people into the funnel. So it got cancelled. And that to me is kind of, again, it's about getting your processes right and making sure you establish success first of all, because actually the role content was playing in that one was perfect in terms of shifting stuff. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the KPIs that the campaign was measured against, which was back getting people into the funnel, and the people who owned the budget and owned the project, their success was terrible.
Yeah.
I've been involved in projects which have gone over budget despite sign-offs. And then we've taken ownership of that content and gone around the world selling the programs to recoup our lack of budget. Now that project went really well for us, but terribly for the client who we'll never work with again. I've been involved in projects which were cancelled because I'm not coming across very good, am I? I've done some really good stuff. I've been involved in projects where again we've fallen out because it started off as broadcast and went digital. Mm-hmm. And despite, again, some of them had the highest responses for, I'm giving away the product here, for test drives, let's say. But the project wasn't owned by the digital team. So it made all the stuff the digital team were doing look really ropey and terrible because it wasn't having the same response. So our project was cancelled.
Okay. So it's really interesting. So it's about being really clear about what you're trying to deliver and with the stakeholders.
That slide about what gets measured gets made and making sure your KPIs are really nailed down is one born out of real experience of being on the wrong end of that and the wrong funding pool for the wrong project.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's also helpful, client side, if you can get that assurance from them that the budget is signed off and locked in early. So there's a lot of, timelines are massively important. The shorter the timeline, the more difficult it is. But also ensuring that the budget is ring-fenced as much as it possibly can, because things can suddenly happen from a brand's point of view, and suddenly the budget may get pulled at the last minute. As both a media owner or a production or whatever part of the chain, you've possibly spent a lot of time already doing a lot of groundwork and teeing up a lot of other stakeholders, be they agents, talent, whoever else, and sometimes that can have a little bit of a knock-on effect. So it's ring-fencing that budget, but having a lot of lead time to be able, or as much lead time as you can, to be able to get everybody together to collaborate on it.
Mm-hmm. I think also there's an element of interference as well. And I think your point, John, is about working in collaboration with, but working with experts. We've all seen the examples of Heinz when they tried to, I think, sort of shoehorn their brand so much into the Channel 5 programme that it turned viewers off.
I made that programme.
Sorry, John. Didn't like to sort of labour the point there, but it is obvious that the client, I believe, was so involved and said, I need to get my brand out there, but branded content works in a different way. It's got to be more subtle. Anyway,
it was founded
let's debate.
All client involvement and experience.
There you go.
I've got a slightly different point of view, which, like, being in a creative agency, we are essentially machines. We've spent the latter half of the 20th century and a bit of, post 20th century, really refining how to do ads, doing it well. That's how all the, the Omnicoms and all the rest of it squeeze a good margin. The thing about this new world of partnerships and collaboration is it's a bit more freestyle.
Yeah.
So just to give one example, so I was working with something with another auto brand, which will remain nameless, but it involved a partnership with quite a well-known dance music act, which was a bit tricky for various reasons, and so we went slightly over budget and over time, and which meant that essentially we missed the September bit of the auto market. That's where the peak of the market is. Now with an ad, you could have just brought it forward, boom, out it goes, done, sales fly. Because this thing was a much more organic thing, and certain unforeseeable things happened along that journey, it meant we missed the height of the market, and the thing went out in December. Any of you bought any cars in December? Not many people do. It's the worst month of the year. As a result of which, all our brand metrics flew off they were great amongst people that saw it. But it didn't sell any cars, and so the client just sort of said, right, that was a failure, never doing that again. And I think the learning for me is that there is a thing around them, is that you can't use the same tools in the machine to deliver what you need. So I think we have to find different ways of improvising effectively, I think, and collaborating effectively.
Yeah.
As
And there's two thoughts on that, isn't there? I think you're right. So timing is one, because we're very used to the AB deadline for the TV spotters then, so everything has to be done 8 weeks in advance and everything. And so it's really comfort blanket for the client. And as Jason said, clients know they don't spend any money until a few weeks before they go on air, so they can pull out of campaigns really quickly. But actually, if you pull out and a film's been in production for 6 months, there's a whole lot of budget that's been spent. So maybe budgeting and timing is two sort of practical things to take out of it, is that you would probably charge your client differently along the way in creating that content than you would in old-fashioned advertising.
But do you know what? The stuff that goes well, and there's lots and lots and lots of that, the stuff that goes well, which is usually the stuff you talk about on these platforms, is the stuff where everyone's gone, fuck it, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it really well. And that's been the initial meeting. And you've looked around at the people you're in the room with, and you look at each other in the eye and you go, come on, we're going to really enjoy this. And some of that, for me, you throw 16 people out of a plane for a live commercial, or you take a load of superstars to the Siberian desert at -70, or you do stuff that is really great and must watch and people talk about forever. And everyone involved in those processes is kind of, we still meet together and have a beer and plan our next campaign.
Yeah.
And one of the things for me is a sign of success is that, in fact, it keeps coming back. Mm-hmm. And there was once a kind of panel like this where it said, what's the branded content that's successful? It's the one that keeps coming back. And to date, there haven't been any. Well, that's changed. Mm-hmm. There are programs that are 100% funded by brand that are well-established parts of the schedule that are loved by millions of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, Eleanor, so back to your question.
No, well, I've got lots, but I think some of them were answered. But I've actually got another question for Dom, which is whether you see, like back in the day, media and media planning would have been in an agency and it kind of went out. And I wonder whether there's a place for it to become more cohesive and looking at user journeys. When you talked about Waitrose and all the different touch points and content, maybe actually we do need to change the model and how we structure our planning departments in terms of looking at different touch points and bringing user journey and user experience back into one team. A rambling question.
I think that was more of a, I think you've given more of an observation than a question. But I want to touch on something you said. I think this business is about having fun, right? And whether or not it's in the media planning department or an agency department, or we're joined up or not joined up or whatever. I think if you get on, so fun may be too big a word, but if you enjoy what you're doing and you get together in a room with those people, ideally agency and other, well, I don't know, as a collaborative unit, and sort of, so I've done loads of stuff over the last 2 years on service design and UX and touch point mapping and whatever jargon we're going to use today. But it's basically getting a bunch of people working out what's the thing that we need to solve, where are the exciting opportunities. Let's get in a scrum together and just sort of knowing what your output is. I think if we just have a bit more fun and collaborate, it makes the collaboration a whole shitload easier. Yeah. And realise it's a kind of a shared ownership thing, and we're in it together. The idea, it might need an orchestrator, a curator, or whatever, but actually, as we're all in it together and trying to do something special and spectacular and really effective. That's why we're in this business, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If we're not, then
I think also you're right, but you need someone to lead that. And I've always found, working, with clients that really get it, they're the ones that are driving it. And I think we need more of those personalities to say, look, we are going to do this. I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm going to do it. And they take ownership of it. And I think that's really important, because when things start to go wrong, you then say, well, we get into the whole blame game thing. If we're going to do it, we have to do it together. We have to have a single point of someone pulling it together and someone who's managing that process as well.
I think we are probably, as a panel, if you're asking the full service question, I used to work for Leopold's, weirdly enough, and I left when they devolved media into Starcom, because I really wanted to work in the full service business. I didn't want to be in the media business. But I think as the world has evolved, I've realised that it probably is more like making a film where a team come together that are specialists that time, and then a new project, you bring some other people, because the sports client is different from the car client.
But in relationships with agencies, so when I work with a media agency, we're seen as a creative resource, and when I work with a creative agency, we're seen as someone who can approach media owners.
Yeah.
Because in a way, a production company, in my sense, is a full-service agency, in that we develop an idea, we produce the idea, we help distribute the idea, we own the idea, and then we take the idea globally and produce it. And that all starts with a gang of people in a room coming up with an idea and creating a business plan of what success looks like for an initiating broadcaster to come on the initial journey at risk with us to see if the programme works.
Yeah.
And then partnering with them for it to continue and continue. And
There's almost sort of two levels to that stage. There's something that predominantly a creative agency has spent time and they've worked out the overriding strategy. And there probably is still that relationship that needs to be worked out in this space of branded content between the creative agency and the media agency, and who's driving what and who's doing what in that space. Because from a production and a media owner perspective, the ones that are going to have the most success are the ones where all the stakeholders can work together. There's the fun and the trust element, and there's definitely an element of it was going to happen. You do need that brave client. You do need the client who's prepared to stand up to their financial director and go, look, I don't care in terms of the measurements and push on the basis of traditional media. I want to drive something that's engaging. I want to deliver this, and this is my budget, and I want to use it. Now, that I think is changing, but there needs to be probably a clear distinction maybe between the media and creative agencies in future as to, how that relationship works with when they engage with media owners and production as well, because we're open to come to the table and collaborate with all stakeholders to make stuff happen, but you can't have that divisive relationship where nobody's all driving in the one direction.
Yeah, so collaboration's then the aim. So taking it to a completely different direction, have we got Harry Glossop in the room? Question from Harry from Wonderman. Try and get a mic to you.
Cheers very much. Is that okay? Yeah. Hi. So that was all really interesting, but I'm in data. So my question was around everything we saw tonight, and often big advertising campaigns are about changing the image of a brand. Using loyalty schemes, you can, for example, tell that there are certain consumers who like certain things. A great example was the Mercedes thing. So there are some people in an age group or a income band that want certain things and a bunch of younger people that want others. How do you see the role of technology coming into the world of splitting brands down? So maybe you don't even have one Mercedes brand, you have a young Mercedes brand and an old Mercedes brand. And is that a thing you want? Is that a thing you want to avoid? What's your view on that?
I think there's a real mix. You need, and actually, for anyone who was in Cannes, there was a real debate around the science and tech and around creativity, and I think you need a balance. So from a Sky point of view, we're very keen to look at how we bring data into creativity in those conversations. So we're bringing it from spaces like Sky AdSmart, where you can now go down to hundreds of different postcodes and different segments of the market, and maybe there's a play in how you can deliver a bespoke creative spot to people in that space. But I think there's a much broader play, and data plays part in that. But I'm not convinced that without a good creative idea and a creative concept, you drive the data. I think you've got to have, again, the reason for people to engage with the brands. But there is so much data out there, and so much stuff that effectively is probably irrelevant. I think you've got to cut to the core of what people want, what does the brand want, what's going to shift their metrics. There are so much things around databases and CRMs and all sorts of stuff that I think we're almost in data overload with this. I think you've got to be clear and concise on the idea, and then how you land it in data is really interesting. And certainly we're not the only media owners thinking about that space, but that's very much heartland for where we want to sort of take things in the future.
Do you think Waitrose are doing well in that territory, Dom, in the sense that they produce a massive content, but I noticed, you know, the My Waitrose card was on your chart as well, and they seem very good at tailoring their content to their customers. In the 8 weeks, have you seen that, or are they just very good at making it look like that?
I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it over the next year. I mean, I think a lot of the companies that our agency at least seems to be working with all share two of the same problems. The data isn't joined up with the same systems, and even when it half is, no one's using it. No one's distilling it in a clear, useful way that helps. I mean, yes, you can automate certain stuff and personalize it, but I think it's still, I think we're just in this zone at the moment in terms of the maturity of the market, where those two it feels like every second conversation I have is ultimately, when you drill down hard into it, it's like, okay, so that doesn't really speak to that, so you can't you can't triangulate, you can't find, and if you can do that, the dashboard isn't right, or there's a team over there, the content team, sometimes isn't speaking to this other team, or the logo, if it's a car manufacturer, the national team isn't speaking to the local retailer, or if it is, it's happening 2 weeks too late. So I think there's a lot of that stuff, which is, I just think it's just a truism of this business. The simpler you can keep it, the better. If we can just all aim for ultimately just keeping it as simple as possible.
Isn't there
just
even
common sense,
sort of higher level things that data or insight or analysis is really useful? But there are two types of content creators. There's the one who can work to a brief. So we need 100 ideas about decision making. Okay, I'll come up with a game show called You Snooze, You Lose. I'll come up with the decision tree, a look back at key decision making moments in history, or I'll come up with changing doors, sliding doors. She said yes, this happened. She said no, this happened. Or you've got the team that work with a blank sheet of paper, who require no analysis, no data, no insight. You know, and if you turn around to an author and say, I want a Pulitzer Prize winning novel based on decision making, they're going to tell you to fuck off. But if you lock them in a garret for 3 years, they might come up with one. And I think that's the true nature of creativity, is sometimes not reliant upon data and not reliant upon insight. And it does play a part, it really does play a part, but I think you need to run both streams. You need to run insight and analysis and demand driven, but you also need that beauty of the supply driven genius in the room who the data will never find.
I think there's also, you know, in media we were obsessed for years with segmentation and drilling down into, you know, is there 7 audiences, 17 audiences? But actually in recent years I think I've become really excited by unifying content and by films that everybody's seen, or pieces or viral videos that everybody shares, and you'd be surprised who likes cats falling into wheelie
the
bins.
data says that fifth gear is more relevant to car consumers than top gear. But my heart tells me that I'm a lying bastard.
Yeah.
Because Top Gear has far much more, you know, cut through to an audience. But you would say, as a car manufacturer, the wastage in that audience means that the key car consumer is much smaller than the highly engaged car consumer of the fifth gear series.
Yeah.
But that's quite clearly, we make fifth gear, by the way, but that's quite clearly a nonsense.
Yeah.
I think there is one sort of fly in the ointment for me, which is kind of as content spreads in amorphous ways, what you're starting to see is yet more silos in clients. And that's potentially quite a dangerous thing, because clients are so siloed often. Sorry, I know there's only one of you here, so I can be quite punchy. But yeah, I mean, the clients are so siloed anyway too often you can end up with a brand that isn't a brand, and a product that isn't a product, and a marketing team that's not a marketing team, and no one's in control of anything. That's a dangerous space for brands to be playing in, and a dangerous space for agencies. You know, if our role, in part, is the guardians of those brands, we've got longer-term relationships often with clients, then we have to try and take some of that ownership back, I think, and go upstream to the heart of the business stuff and the heart of the business metrics as client structures evolve. So that, yeah.
Yeah. Does that help? It's great for providing genius insight, but too much splicing can be a real danger. Any other questions? Throw them up to you. Toby, was that right? Yeah.
Thanks. I got sent a cartoon a little while ago. I like cartoons. And it had this bloke scratching around on the floor, and a policewoman came up to him, he was underneath a lamppost. And she said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm looking for my keys." And she went, "Okay, well, where did you lose them?" And he said, "Oh, about 2 blocks that way." And she said, "Why are you looking here?" And he goes, "Oh, the light's much better." And I think it's interesting because the things that we can measure, we become really obsessed by. And especially when we can measure so much, we become totally focused on what those measurements tell us rather than what we should just know. So I was kind of curious, in a time when we can measure loads and a time when you guys are talking about obsession with data, what's the important stuff that you talk about that isn't measurable, that either gives people confidence that you're doing the right thing or gives you confidence that you're not screwing things up?
So we get the overnights. So overnights come into every single production company, and I'm sure it's very similar along the commissioning floor of a broadcaster. And overnights have one meaning and one meaning only. More people watch my show than watch your show. And the only 2 metrics that people look at are the total audience and the share, neither of which are relevant at all if you're buying and selling advertising. And the third metric that's in there, which is the TVR, no one in my side of the business has any understanding what that is. It's purely there as a bragging right, and we select share or size depending on which one beats the other person who's had a show on last night.
There are key measurement metrics within broadcast. I think ultimately, I'm not quite sure if this directly answers the question or not, but I think there's still something in what they call the truism and the key truth. And in regards to branded content campaign, it's got to come around to the key truth, i.e. to resonate with the consumer. Why do people want to engage with it? What is it they want to do? Does it make sense? And I think looking at it from what I would do from a creative solutions perspective, why do people want to work with our channels and our brands? It has to make sense. When I go and talk to the head of sports, or I go and talk to the head of Sky One, or whatever it is, the key question, they will all come back to me and say, well, where's the relevance and why is it true for us to be involved in that level of partnership? And that's the measurement, because if it makes sense to them as brand guardians of those channels, if it makes sense to the commissioning team who are, again, part of that strategy, and if the merger of the brand makes sense, it's their job to get that sense of what that gut reaction is. And again, that whole point about going with your gut, I think there's a real mix, again, on gut and data, but you've really got to get the truism and the key truth right first. If it makes sense to those people, it will probably make sense to the audience and the consumer, and then you build out from there. So, I'm very much the traditionalist in that sense of make it feel right, make it sound right, and then get people excited by the idea.
I think there's also a way that, in the days when we've got real-time data and we've got so much data and everyone kind of defaults to, oh, well, it's done, 10 million views on YouTube if you're not in a broadcast stream. To me, it's about, what we have done, how has it changed behaviour, before seeing something and then after seeing something? Has it made someone more favourable towards that brand? Has it actually changed the way they think about that brand? Some of the examples I showed, these are banks, Standard Chartered Bank, HSBC. They got pretty bad reputations, but the stuff they were running made people feel good, made more positive about them. You can't really do that with an ad, a 30-second ad, I would argue. If you do it in conjunction with content, then that's probably a much more powerful way to engage with it. You know, the quote from the head of research at HSBC. You know, I think that kind of, to me, sums up what we should be doing with data. You know, use it well, use it, and look at the insights it's giving you.
I think it all goes back to what Tom said. I think if you work with the client to really, really nail what the brand need is and the brand goal is, but if that's in the language of the brand, you know, if it's about feelings or emotions, then you just keep that going through the KPIs, then you as a team should stay nailed to the same thing. But in a vacuum, things like numbers and share will fill the vacuum of measurability. But if the team have a written goal, which is about passion and about what consumers really want from the brand, then you're more likely to get what Jason's talking about, I think. So I think numbers always fall into a vacuum of measurability, that if people don't know what they're really setting out to do, well, then they'll measure what is possible to measure, as opposed to really, really knowing what you're setting out to do and then finding a way of measuring that. Because you can measure most things.
Yeah, and you
At the end of the day.
need both, because you know no one's going to sign a check for something based on, well, it drove on an awful lot of soft metrics, and that seemed very nice, and from a brand shift perspective it worked. Well, you know, how much product did it sell, what did it deliver, how much exposure did my campaign get? So there's still the absolute fundamentals and, you know, the core economics around media value that you still have to pay homage to. But it's a two-part equation, definitely around the softer brand measurements and movements, but also, you know, the delivery of the campaign and what that media is.
But I think one of the biggest things for me was the change in the broadcasting regulations away. I'm a spot on broadcast regulations. So the Audiovisual Media Services Directive has a piece on, primary piece in legislation is changed from a principle of separation to a principle of declaration. So editorial and commercial used to be kept separate. That's why there's a black frame in a commercial break between the programme and the commercial break. It's why the French have a notification that says publicity, or the Germans have Werbung. Here come the adverts. We've stopped making programmes now. Now that kind of declaration or transparency of relationship means that brands can be involved. Why have broadcasters crossed that Rubicon, and why is that happening? I think those are the real questions, and they're still not really being answered. And the one thing that data does show, in 1983, ITV had 100% of the commercial revenue that was available for television advertising. It's not 100% anymore. And you know, that graph is only going one way. And so where I don't enter this into a crisis of marketing brought around by proliferation of choice or avoidance of commercial messaging, I come at this as a challenge to the funding of content moving forward. And there are only three ways of funding content: subscription, taxation, and everything else. Subscription is absolutely rock bottom, solid, copper bottom guaranteed. Biggest subscription business in the country. I'm owned by Discovery and Liberty Global, two of the world's largest subscription distributors. Taxation in this country is a ivory tower, and one that's seriously under threat in the next 5 years. And if we want content to be funded by taxation, we've got to seriously look at that relationship with the BBC, because it is going to be challenged. So if taxation is going to be removed as a means of funding, then the pressure that's going to be borne upon the commercial ability to fund content is going to be greater, and the reliance then upon data to deliver metrics for return on investment. If it becomes one that isn't about effectiveness and one that is about cost effectiveness, it is a race to the bottom where we will get the content we deserve. And there is a massive difference between a kid in a bedroom speaking into a webcam that costs nothing to make and Wolf Hall. But we need funding models for Wolf Hall, but we don't need funding models for the return on investment of somebody telling you which makeup to buy. And those are serious questions that transcend marketing, planning, and broadcast. And it is about, for me, it's about, and this is my passion point, sorry, as you might have imagined, it's what's our relationship between the funding of content and our relationship with that distribution of content. And brands have to, and this is imperative, have to be involved in that mix moving forward. And it's the regulatory changes that have enabled that.
I'm really excited there's so many people here from creative agencies tonight, because I think we're living through an extraordinary generation, an extraordinary moment in terms of creativity, which is akin to music in the 1960s. And I think maybe part of the things behind your question, Tony, is kind of how can we create magic together? And you know, I think there's a responsibility and an opportunity for everyone here, that's certainly of planners amongst you, to to influence clients, and the way to do that, I think, is by giving them a shared sense of higher destiny in terms of what their mark on their brand can be. And if you can kind of find a way of leaving space in the conversation for the clients to see, to carry a higher flame and see where put their imprint on a brand and its destiny, and then obviously you've got to, I don't know, you've kind of got to take back some of that ownership. But if you give them a sense of the momentum that's an unstoppable force, it will lead to exciting new places, and then use the rational bit of your planner brain to reassure them. That's a cool thing to do. Mm-hmm. So that for me, it comes back to brand, and about higher purpose and leaving a mark on the world, but just having more tools to be able to do that. And if we call that content, that's fine. Maybe it's called something else, but for me, that can take all sorts of shapes and forms. So I think that's a really exciting thing for us to be able to.
Yeah, and it pulls together into a cohesive story, doesn't it? That the role of the agency is to, as you say, is to steward the client towards that vision and give space for it, and then to pull the team around you for collaborating it. And we have to learn that team can change every single time, and can change depending on the client need. And once we get into that, as well as that, we have to abandon some of our old processes and learn the way to move that forward. So it's quite a different model, but really exciting.
Yeah.
And
Find the
great
magic.
Content. Find the magic.
Find the magic.
Find the magic. Find the team. So where do we get a microphone to you? There you go.
We have been talking about like agencies and production companies and branded content, but I never hear the word viewer or user tonight. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask what you guys think is the influence of user-generated content nowadays for brands.
Yeah, I suppose, as you say, Dom, Budweiser Dream Goes it was about taking something broader, using the fame and scale of advertising, but taking that much into social media and letting people bringing their own UGC to life in terms of bringing those dream goals and broadening that campaign. I think where brands are better at doing that work is when it becomes natural and there's a truism about what it is they're trying to achieve. It's probably, when we talk from a Sky point of view, we have viewers, but we also see them very much as customers, because we're cognizant of the fact that these people pay a monthly subscription to us, and they have the decision and option to stay or go with us. So we see them very much more as our customers, and we want to treat them in that way. But they're very much still, it's very important to us as viewers what they do and get engaged with. But I think the broader point is absolutely around, if you're a brand and you've got a relevance and you've got fame, I think then you engage people naturally to then create their own user-generated content around it. I think there's probably a lot of stuff out there that becomes a bit forced and a little bit contrived, and I think that goes back to maybe what John, Dom and Andrew have been saying as well. So I think you've got to be very careful as a brand in that space, that what you've got to do is natural and have relevance. But again, it's a kit of parts. There's a whole toolkit out there with content marketing where you can, don't just think about it as a UGC piece. What exactly is the purpose of it within a wider marketing campaign if it's a brand?
I think you've got to have, whether or not it's user-generated or not, I think, for me, it's the most amazing content still has an empathy. It comes from some sort of an insight or whatever. There's a genuine empathy. So the fact that, Claire Balding is on the back of Waitrose Weekend, it comes from a really good intuitive understanding of what their customers, their current customers, are kind of into, what they find interesting, what they like. It's not to say that's right. I mean, I imagine we'll be moving that sort of forward. But right now, in terms of where Waitrose has been, which is basically a space where it's not really done any advertising stuff for a couple of years properly, really. Sort of that's what its heartland audience are into, and that comes from you do have to have that, whether it's from an editorial content piece or whether it's from an agency piece or wherever. You do have to have a sixth sense of what is going to kind of, what's under the layers of your customer and your consumer. And I'm sure stuff like in Wolf Hall and Budweiser, and like somewhere in all of the conversations here it comes from.
The thing about it is you can't control stuff. We can't control the message. So
around that,
exactly. So I think
a lot of the content that you create is created before
Yeah, but I think the point is that you can influence those conversations with the content that you create. You are wanting people to have a reaction in terms of that respect. You can't, we don't know what that reaction will be, but there'll be a reaction. So, and then you have to have a strategy in place to look at that.
I mean, let's take brands out of the equation for a minute. And the general issue is user-generated content. User-generated content strikes fear into the hearts of most broadcasters, producers, and platform owners around the world because, it's not just standards and swearing or libel or anything like that. It's just, is it going to be any good? And I was involved in the creation of a series called Ross Noble's Freewheeling, where Ross Noble, using Twitter and only using Twitter, tweets out to his fans, "I'm in Nottingham, what should I do?" And the whole series is filmed as a result of all the tweets. So we're currently in this room here at the IPA, and we tweet out, and Ross would jump in. Now that then is user-generated in its essence because there is no script. You try having a conversation with a brand that says, we're going to put your £150,000 an episode in the hands of Ross Noble and the internet. So I think the role of, and one of my slides was about process-driven, and I actually go sometimes more, it's not process-driven, it's command and control. So, I salute the brand that says, do you know what, John, here's £150,000, you go and get me Ross Noble and the internet, and I'll put it on air. But that show's been recommissioned twice and is currently in production, having been exported, now being licensed in the States. So it might work, says the market, that's prepared to put its hand in its pocket to spend that £150,000. But there isn't a brand in the world that is that brave or stupid.
Well, a bit like Dom's campaign, we've overrun and missed the 8 o'clock deadline. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant that we've got so much to say. I think I'm going to award the bottle of champagne to the gentleman here at the front, because anything that leaves us, that our job is to give the client space to find magic and to bring the teams around us to create magic. I'm up for that. So I think that took us to a great conversation that sums up what we're all in our jobs for and why we're all here of Monday evening. So thanks to everybody for coming along. Thank you so much to all the panel. If everybody doesn't mind giving them a round of applause before you leave the room.